Hello, this is Mark Tooley, president of the Institute on Religion and Democracy, with the pleasure of conversing today with Dr. Albert Mohler, the very famous president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. He is prominent both as a Christian academic and as a commentator on public issues. His seminary, he can correct me, but I believe it's the biggest seminary in America and among the biggest in the world. And so his leadership is much appreciated and respected. Al, it's great to have you on.
Well, Mark, it's great to be with you. I'm very glad to have the conversation.
Firstly, I'd like to talk about how you personally and how the seminary in general are responding to the pandemic.
Well, in the first place, we were among the early institutions that had to come to the decision to send residential students home, and that's just sheer heartbreak. But it was on the leading edge of what became a national pattern. Our state government here in Kentucky very quickly came to the conclusion that the campuses themselves all across the state could become, if they were not already, a vector for infection. And so out of love of God and love of neighbor, we responded to that request. And since then, I'm glad to say, and we already had one of the nation's largest online programs of higher education. And so very thankful for that. So we were able to shift students to an online format, and they've all completed the semester. And it's not the way we would have planned it, but I'm thankful for God's providence that we were able to conclude it and press ahead. And I mean, we've even been able to announce 5 or 6 new degree programs that were underway, and we're going to go ahead and launch them. And of course, we're hoping to have students here on the fall, and that's our plan. But we're learning together, and we're all learning a kind of missiological adaptivity right now. And and some of these bigger questions are out of our control for all of us.
Sure. And you all announced some cutbacks already in your budget and staff.
Right. Yeah, we're not only a theological seminary, but of course we're in a college, undergraduate college. We're in the whole sector of higher education, and I think most Americans are probably unaware of the fact that the entire business model of higher education could not continue before COVID-19. It was a matter of how long before major change had to take place. And I've been in this role at Southern Seminary for 27 years. And one of my determinations in leadership is not to be caught with the tide going out, but rather to be ahead of these changes. And so the COVID-19 crisis has just collapsed all the time. So what would have been 5 or 6 years of change is now going to happen in 5 or 6 weeks. But I'm thankful to be leading an institution that's strong and resolute. And so we went ahead and made a 30% cut in the budget because we also wanted to lower tuition. I think we just really need to help students and families to be able to afford higher education. And so cutting tuition is what institutions don't do, but we did. But that required lowering the budget and making some painful adjustments. But I believe we'll be a much stronger institution for it.
And presumably other seminaries will be following suit shortly.
I expect they will. One way or another. And of course, if you think about the pressure or stress on the higher education sector, theological education is the most stressed of all. I mean, the only people who care about us are Christians. And this is a good deal of your work as well, Mark, in the IRD. Most of the liberal institutions are just lost anyway. But there are some conservative schools that are still serving the church very well. And I'm just praying that Christians will support not only Southern Seminary, but all faithful seminaries to see us through this, because the church needs faithful pastors.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you before we go further, you made a bit of a splash a couple of weeks ago announcing whom you will be voting for later this year. It was a slight adjustment from 2016. So if you could just briefly share about that and what response you've received so far.
Yeah, a part of me was surprised by the surprise, because I've been talking this way ever since early in the Trump administration. I have been at this a long time, and I entered this office just about the same time that Bill Clinton entered the Oval Office. I'm still here, by the way, and he's not been in that office a long time. But one of the things I had to learn early in this was, speaking to, I think I was on the Larry King show, well, tens of times, even talking about the Bill Clinton situation and all the rest, and many other programs. And I said what I believed then, and I believe what I said then. I stand by it. I believe character is really important. And without going into details, we need to remember the Clinton scandals had to do with malfeasance in office. And I called for him to resign that office. When candidate Trump was running for president, I felt like I was in a very strong ethical pinch because of, and I did not believe, here's the bottom line. I did not believe he would do what he said he would do. I didn't. He'd been pro-choice and been a Democrat and all these things. But early in the Trump administration, the actual appointments, especially judicial appointments, executive orders and other issues convinced me that even when it was not to his political advantage, President Trump was taking a very strong stand on behalf of unborn life and other issues, religious liberty being paramount amongst those issues. And so that required a recalibration of my thinking. But, the press jumped all over it as if this was, some kind of instantaneous conversion. But, I do a daily podcast of about 25 minutes. Anyone listening to that daily knows there's nothing instantaneous there. But it does tell you how disruptive the current political situation is in any context, including the family dinner table for many families. Mm-hmm. So we're not surprised anymore. But look, it's also, and you care deeply about politics. I'll tell you this. I think the biggest change for me as a systematic and historical theologian dealing with political theology for my entire life, the biggest change that's come to me is the recognition that in our U.S. Political system, with the radical polarization of the two parties now, and that's a 40-year process, it really doesn't matter much anymore who's at the head of the ticket. It really comes down to the commitments of the party. And so I think I could look administration by administration and say, if it had been Dick Gephardt or Bill Clinton, the policies would have been just about the same. If it had been, George W. Bush or one of the other Republican candidates at that time, Rick Santorum, the policies would have been just about the same, and the appointments would have been just about the same. And so, I think in that sense, we're kind of entered in the U.S. a political situation that's more akin to what our friends in the United Kingdom have had for a long time, which is you're basically voting for a party. The party is going to, by its own mechanisms, choose its standard bearer. But the issue is, what's the platform of the party and the impact of the vote?
I don't know if you saw it, but Providence, our journal, published a column by Daniel Strand on your endorsement and the issue of Christian moralism that you might check out.
Yeah, I'll be glad to look at it. The only quibble I have is that I officially and legally, and you will fully understand this, I legally did not endorse. I didn't use that language. Mm-hmm. I said, this is how I'm going to vote. Sure. And look, I have been critical of President Trump on any number of issues and will continue to be so. But I will, I'll be voting just as I said in the November election. And I didn't make that statement, by the way, until it was really clear who the Democratic nominee was going to be. And we know what the commitments of the Democratic Party are going to be.
Moving on to your book, The Gathering Storm, whose name echoes a volume by a hero of yours,
yes,
some 70 years ago. If you could hold that up for a moment.
Yes, thank you.
And I was honored to provide a blurb for it. I think there's a brief mention in the book about Methodist Church struggles, which I appreciated. But please tell us about the book, how you came to write it, and what your purpose was ultimately.
Yeah, every book project comes out of the conversations that you're having as an author. And I thought with the 2020 presidential election looming, not to enter into the election itself in the book, but rather just to say, you know, every 4 years, Americans tend to think about things more seriously than they might the other 3 years, and an election focuses a lot of these issues. You're right. Winston Churchill was a hero to me, and is. And when I was 13 years old, I first became aware of him. And you know, in his history of the Second World War, the first volume was entitled "The Gathering Storm," and I just borrowed that title and credit Churchill with it, precisely because, as a boy, I started wondering, why did nobody listen to him? He was absolutely right. When he saw Nazi Germany rearming, and he actually listened to Hitler speak, he read Mein Kampf, he said, it's not as if we don't know what we're facing here. But Britain's political elite did not want to come to terms with that reality. And of course, that's why there are 6 volumes to that history. Had they listened to Churchill, there likely would have been 1 volume about how the war had been averted. But we're looking at a gathering storm now of issues: religious liberty, threats to human dignity and human life, just real subversive movements concerning the family, and even, you know, just basic understandings of what it means to be human. The educational system, a generational challenge that is coming. So that I just wanted to help Christians in particular in the United States be able to understand the landscape better and understand that these are not unrelated issues. I think that's one of the problems. A lot of conservative Christians, no, that's an issue, that's an issue, that's an issue. They don't see how they were tied together. I'll credit Churchill with tying all that together in the 1930s. I'm just trying to tie some of those things together for Christians in 2020.
I'm going to try to summarize your views by saying you're a short-term pessimist and possibly a long-term optimist. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you know, I will put it this way, and as a fellow believer, you'll understand what I say. I don't believe a Christian can be optimistic or pessimistic. Optimistic is too presumptuous, and pessimistic is just, well, non-theistic. So, you know, I think the strong Christian word is hope. I am hopeful. And as a theologian, I'm deeply Augustinian. And of course, almost all Western theology is in that sense. But in the specific sense that Augustine was doing the most important theological work at the end of the period of the early church, when Rome was collapsing. And for many people, the collapse of Rome meant history was coming to an end. And Augustine was so clear to say, oh, it's as bad as it looks. You know, the fall of Rome is going to be horrifying, but Jesus Christ is Lord. And out of the ruins will come something to God's glory. And you know, Jesus Christ has established his church, and upon this rock, he said it, and you know, the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So the Christian attitude is hope, and I am hopeful. You know, I'm a Christian, and I'm writing to Christians as you do, and so yeah, I'm leaning into hope. Now, just Al Mohler, the individual, yes, I have pessimistic and optimistic moments, but Al Mohler, the theologian, has to speak to me and tell me it's hope, man. Give up on the optimism or the pessimism.
Well, let me ask you one final question relating to hope. You are likely the next president of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the second largest religious body in America, which is enormous with 15 million members, but has been suffering decline for the last 15 years. How does the convention reverse that decline?
Well, I want to be careful and say that what we need to reverse is any failure on our part of either conviction or of evangelism and vigorous witness. We don't control the times. And so I always want to temper, when I'm talking to conservative evangelicals, this is why I say, you know, we need to be concerned about any statistical downturn, just because we care about the people, and the numbers are an indication of the people. But, you know, one of the things I have to remind people of is that I have people who ask me, you know, what happened to mainline Protestantism and how does that play in? You know, one of the things that people don't give attention to is birth rate. And so you know, we have about half as many adolescent baptisms in the Southern Baptist Convention than we had in the 1970s. That's at least partly correlated to the fact we have about half as many kids as we had in the 1970s, family by family. So we do need to do the check, and clearly it's incumbent upon us to hold fast to the gospel and to be sure that we are sharing the gospel with every man, woman, boy, and child that we possibly can, that we're nurturing Christians, raising them in the admonition of the Lord, that we are training them to be faithful evangelists of the gospel. But we're also living in a secularizing age in which, and Mark, here's something huge, people just don't go to church because they receive cultural approval for doing so. And so we're about to find out where the Christians are, because they're going to be the people who go to church. And so I pray every day there'll be more people who know Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord, and more people in our churches and gospel believing, you know, Bible preaching churches. And Southern Baptists and others, we need to, of course, redouble every effort we possibly can. But the standard has to be faithfulness. And I believe faithfulness will produce statistical evidence. But I also believe we can make of that statistical evidence either, well, let's go back to where we're talking, optimism or pessimism, where what's really called for is faithfulness.
Dr. Albert Mohler, thank you for your ministry and leadership, and I hope that when normalcy returns, we'll see you in Washington, D.C. at some point.
Well, I tell you what, I've got a daughter and son-in-law and two grandchildren, two little grandsons there in the Washington area. I cannot wait to get to Washington to see them, but also just because the times are strategic. And so I'm thankful you're in Washington and in that area, and IRD is there. And by the way, I just want to thank you for the work of IRD and your own work and witness. And we're in this together. So I'm glad to have shared this conversation, and I'll look forward to sharing another conversation soon in person, I hope.
Absolutely. God bless you.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye.